Live streaming is on.
Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. It's August 13, 2021. We want to thank Clinton Ignatoff for being such a great human being. Thank you, Clinton, for facilitating and all you do for us. Thank you. Okay, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with C.W. Winter. Thank you. We're going to be calling you Curtis, and you said that's okay. Thanks for being here. Yeah, it's a real honor and a pleasure.
I'm happy to be here.
The first question is, what's the best thing for a human being?
Oh boy, you're getting right into it. Oh gosh, I mean, I usually don't make it my business to go around telling folks what's best for them, but maybe let's see if we can come up with something objective here. Well, I don't know if I can give a definite answer, but I'll try to think about the question. So like in some ways, a question like this makes me feel like a nihilist, right? Because I don't really know how there can be a universal answer. Like my immediate impulse would be to gravitate to something like, I don't know, like a basement reality, like survival. The best thing for a human is to survive. But of course, there are exceptions even to that. For example, people who in situations of urgency might want euthanasia or something like this. Or there are people for whom the idea of survival would include some future scenario of being uploaded into a silicon-based form, whereas others would find that totally unacceptable, which would make that answer collapse. And then we have to ask ourselves if the term human being even holds at that point. And so, you know, I mean, our genes would tell us what's the best thing for a human, that the best thing for the human being is to pass on our genes, and well-being people would tell you that, you know, things like eating well and being in nature, but who's to say that well-being is necessarily, you know, the goal? And so there's this problem of, you know, it seems of finding the right thing to measure by. You know, there's this question of increments. And so, I mean, I think some moral philosophers would want you to hone in on some answer about minimizing suffering. And I can see that too as an answer that might at first seem like some asymptote of universality, and maybe it is, but I still think we can find edge cases, you know, in that, you know, in people who do things like ultra endurance training, or like Wim Hof cold water training, or like the Laird Hamilton backyard workout, or you know, or a guy like David Goggins who will tell you that the best thing for human beings is to do something that sucks every day. You know, those kind of things, you know, where suffering is used as some sort of acclimator of the mental immune system, or as some kind of longevity maximizer. So then minimizing suffering falls apart as an answer too, you know? I mean, there was this Twilight episode called maybe something like Willoughby, something like this, where this guy gets off a train in this town, and things start going really well for him. And then he realizes that it's not just some things are going well, everything's going really well. And he suspects that maybe he's in heaven. But then at one point he starts to get really frustrated with the degree to which things are going well. And he tries to hit this really bad pool shot to see if something could go wrong, but still all the balls go in the holes, and the 8-ball falls in last, and he wins in one shot. And he realizes that he's not in heaven, he's in hell. So this idea of no suffering falls apart as an answer. And so maybe that leaves us with the idea that the best thing for a human being is to have something that feels worth struggling for.
Yeah.
And I think that's my answer.
Let's leave it at that, because that was amazing. You almost beat Tom Gunning for the best answer ever. I think you did. There you go. But keep your answers down to 2 minutes. But I'm not trying to.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm not trying to limit you, because that was so beautiful. Because what the goal of this series is to help me psychoanalyze the question and how they're worded. So people literally take it, you know, what's the best thing for a human being? Craig Baldwin said human touch. I always went, that's a great answer. And then, you know, so there's no right or wrong answers. I'm asking for intuitive, impulsive kind of feelings. And you did that so well. Believe me, that was mind blowing. And so what's the, you know, like at the beginning, it's sort of these either or, and of course it's not the two that I might give you.
I don't mind either ors, because then there's a gradient.
Right. So and again, it's like we want to sort of get through. I have 130 questions. We want to sort of get through 40, but it doesn't mean that if you're on a roll like you just were, don't hesitate. I don't mean to limit you. But the next question is, thank you so much. That was amazing. What the second one is, what's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Gosh, I don't know. I'm going to say it's one-on-one talking. It's one-on-one. That's when the best stuff happens for me. When it gets into groups, I find in my general experience, of course, there are going to be exceptions to this, is things start to surface out a bit. And so for me, if you really want to get into it and you really want to get down in there, if you've got several hours and a couple bottles of wine and 2 people, that seems to me like the perfect math. And so that's what I like.
Dude, that's amazing, because I have this cliche. I always say 2 people talking is the revolution. So, what you said was we get that a lot as direct experience, but you zoomed it in on one-on-one, like 2 people, which is the essence of this Zoom. This is amazing. So why do you think people collect or gather information?
Oh my gosh, this is a real workout, Gerry. Well, I mean, beyond reasons of pure survival and reproduction, I think perhaps because we are pattern-seeking primates. We have minds that have some kind of computational component, and information is all around us. I mean, the entirety of the universe is information, and we are possibly, and I'm not saying this is so, but we're possibly some kind of discrete automata embedded into some sort of substrate, and the information is seemingly everywhere. And, the substrate is a thing that exists precisely because it can contain information. And I think probably people who become most obsessed with collecting information, be it academics or birders or record collectors or cinephiles or so on, whatever sort of obsessive it might be, are people who happen to be especially good at identifying patterns in that sea of information, and who are then able to turn those patterns into models, which produce the reward of the good chemicals happening in the brain. And we desire the good chemicals, so we do it again and again. And this results in almost all of the great physics and mathematics and music and so on that our species comes up with. So then repeat, etc.
Is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
Oh my God. I mean, I think that to have a nervous system is to be a sponge for information. It is literally impossible not to be gathering information while conscious. So my initial impulse is to say that it's fundamentally innate.
Good. Let's leave it there. Do thoughts create emotions?
Do thoughts create emotions? Do thoughts create emotions? That's a playful phrasing. Yeah. I mean, it seems to me the word "create" is doing a lot of work in in that question. And I feel like maybe I can get my head around this maybe more if I say something like cause instead of create, because it suddenly feels like there's an agent role in there, and I don't know that there's an agent here. And so maybe we can ask, like, what is most responsible for the content of our minds? Is it passion or reason? And, someone like Hume would have told us it was passion. Absolutely. Or is there like more of a normative question? Like, what are the correct opinions about these matters based in? Like, do we get there better through passion or reason? To which we might say it's a mix. It seems to me that they can shape each other. Like, I believe there's some study, and I don't know how replicable it is, that you can force people into happiness by spreading their mouths into a smile shape. Or with laugh therapy, you can get a group of people who all start doing fake laughter, and by the end, everybody's really laughing. Or vice versa, you can see how something like extreme sleep deprivation, will make you more negative or catastrophizing. So it seems to me that it's a two-way street, though I would certainly allow for other interpretations.
Yeah, it's like it's a little related. If I'm giving a lecture, I'll say everybody yawn. It makes you more susceptible. Even if you fake the yawn, they've said it makes you more susceptible. So whatever. Is thinking more innate or more invented?
I mean, that's going to be really similar to my answer to the last question, because
Okay, let's leave it at that. Fill in the blank. Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I.
Oh gosh, that can be interpreted in so many different
Well,
ways.
just off the top of your head, Kurt, it's like just don't think about it. Yeah.
Until ever. Gosh, I mean, yeah. I mean, I just
until I don't know what I think until you dropped the I and said ever. No.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm perpetually in a state of thinking I'm probably wrong, and aren't there more truths we can run through to get a better answer? And so I don't know that I just don't know where people get all their certitude from. I sometimes envy it. Yeah.
No, that's good, because that's, my book starts with Joan Didion. I don't know what I think until I've written it. McLuhan, I don't know what I think until I've said it. And I counter. And then there's one that Wittgenstein, or one of those hotshot dudes, always quotes from Dumas show. It says something about images. And then I start the book by saying, I don't know what I think until I ask somebody else.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, in some ways, when I make a film, I don't know what I think until I hear other people tell me what it's about.
That's totally.
So I don't know what it's. Yeah, I don't know what's it about. What I think until you tell me.
Can humans think without language?
Oh God! I mean, I think that people. Fuck am I? I mean, I'm just a filmmaker, man. I'm not. This isn't in my area of expertise, of course. This one, but can humans think without language? Yeah, I would think so. I would think so, because we have dreams, and those don't seem to be particularly language based to me.
Good. That's really good. So Chomsky says that a language is not just words; it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. When language doesn't work, how do you cope?
Oh, that's so interesting. I mean, well, are we sticking with Chomsky's definition that it's a culture and all this other stuff?
No. Whenever I set up any of my questions, wait, let me just finish. Whenever I set up any of my questions with a quote, you don't have to relate the quote to the answer for the question. It's your choice. Just to be clear, it's you.
I spent my 20s traveling a lot. I was all over the place for my work, working in film production. And I was constantly in places where I didn't speak the language. And I've made 2 feature films now where I didn't speak the language. I made a film in Swedish, and I don't speak Swedish. And I made a film in Japanese, and I don't speak Japanese. Now, of course, there were people there who could translate for me, and it was all well handled. But I think that when deprived of language, we're forced to rely on so many other senses to figure out how to communicate and what people are thinking, and it opens us up to so many other forms of communication, and so kind of that's how I cope. I think. I mean, I made 2 whole films without speaking the language.
No, that was perfect. So, are humans basically, again, it's both, and it depends. Are your observation of humans, are they more thinking beings or more feeling beings in general?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to have to give primacy to the feelings, and I don't know that that's true, but it seems to me that they while each can create the other, it feels to me that it's more common that feelings create ideas, and so I'm going to give the primacy to the passions, to the impulse, to the limbic, to the lizard brain, and say that probably does most of the work.
Great. We're going to leave thinking behind, because there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got really right. No. These are 2 Turing questions from the 50s. Is thinking functioning of the soul?
Is thinking functioning of the soul? I mean, that's interesting. I mean, it's a Turing question, huh? I mean, if we're getting into like computational theory or constructivism, I mean, it seems that I don't know if thinking is well, first of all, I don't know what the word soul means, but it doesn't seem to me that thinking is functioning of the soul. It seems that if we're going on this tradition that, you know, starts in the early 20th century with Wittgenstein and so on, and Bertrand Russell, and then gets to Turing. Turing was Wittgenstein's mentee, and then we bring that forward to like Gödel and John Conway and, you know, these kind of fellas. It would seem to me that they would believe we are these discrete automata that are running on some kind of function. And if our brain can only process at maybe 60 bits per second, that the automata we're always a split second behind the forefront of the automata. So we're always just a bit behind, you know, what's going on there. And so that kind of shows us the order that we're in.
Super. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
Yeah, not yet. I mean, not yet. I mean, you know, who had this conversation recently? I mean, I think the maybe it was Yosha Bach or someone, but I like this idea that you know, people think of the Turing machine as, you know, or the Turing test is that this ability that we can make a machine that will trick experts into thinking that these are human answers. But the real Turing test is a recursive test that asks us, are we generally intelligent? In other words, can we build a machine that would pass the Turing test? And the only way we could do that is if we were intelligent enough to understand ourselves. So the real Turing test is a recursive test asking whether we are generally intelligent. And we're not there yet.
Yeah, dude, super. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't trust my answer on this, but it feels like what I do here, because I spend a lot of time at this desk, is pursuing meaning.
Yeah.
You know, if we're just looking at pure clock hours, that's probably true. At the denial of a bunch of happiness, I would say.
See, look, this has been utterly happy and fun so far, so I think you're a happy dude. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating it?
That's another playful phrasing, and these words detect and create, you know, they're doing a lot of work. When we talk about mind, I mean, I would think that we're referring to that which is conscious. So it's hard for me to immediately know how we're teasing apart mind and consciousness, unless we're talking about the part of the mind that isn't unconscious, and maybe we can start there. And then there's that word create, which again implies an agent. And I don't know if there's an agent in this equation. Maybe we can go more neutral with cause instead of create. But and there might even, it seems to me, maybe be a category error in the idea that consciousness is separable or separate from mind. And I guess, you know, maybe we could play with an epiphenomenalist solution to that problem and think that mind is a feature of the body but is separate. But I don't know about that. But if we accept for the sake of argument, this automata thing, you know, you know, conscious would be detecting mind. Or if we preserve the order of a question, we could think of consciousness as a state that the mind can be in. For example, it can be out of that state while we're in dreamless sleep or under general anesthesia. But if consciousness is a state that the mind can be in, then consciousness is a kind of monitoring system. It is awareness of self. And so it seems to me, you know, that the mind seems like more of a causer to me, and consciousness seems like more of a detector. Now, I'm sure some of the philosopher pros here in town will come along and tell me in all sorts of clever ways how that's not quite correct, but it feels correct to me.
Beautiful. In town, you mean London, or you mean in the world?
I live in Oxford. It's a small town. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not going to tell you who said this, but I usually don't pull this question out, but you're able to understand it probably. How about technologies as the collective unconscious and art as the collective unconsciousness? So they're separating art and technology, you know, our inventions and our art. Let's just say we're sort of separating them. Then they're saying they're keeping the word collective, but they're saying, what's the difference between conscious and consciousness? So, how about technologies as the collective unconscious and art as the collective unconsciousness? Any any just reaction or comment to that?
Do I get to guess who said it? Is it McLuhan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm led to believe that this question, you know, there's probably some kind of lengthy throat clearing that leads up to a statement like that. But as I don't have it, I'm sort of grasping for a foothold. I mean, what we have is this suffix ness, right? Which means a state of or a condition of. So the difference between collective unconscious and collective unconsciousness. And he seems to be saying that technology has fully taken over the collective unconscious. And as somebody who doesn't study McLuhan, I'm sure there are McLuhanites who can fill me in on the arguments he's using to reach that conclusion. And while it seems to me that he's probably partially correct, or is indeed partially correct, I'm not convinced yet that it's completely correct. I mean, you know, we don't even need to look at something obvious like internet art or even art, video art for this to be true. You know, we can look back to, like, you know, a George Kubler model. Like, if I'm someone who deeply studies Rodin sculptures, for example, that's going to permanently alter the way that I go back and look at sculptures of ancient Greece. It can't not do that, which means that time doesn't simply flow forward. It loops back and it eddies, and we can change our perceptions in reverse. And so I think that when we live in a state where we are constantly spending time in front of computers, constantly spending time on phones, I mean, we have these brain prosthetics right here with us all the time, it's going to affect the state of our unconscious. It's going to make us desire things. And so, like, even if we are to kind of, you know, look at work that we might tend to think of as more analog or as more a part of the meat space, you know, like ceramics, which seems to be quite popular at the moment, or most painting practices, you know, despite how they might have been made, due to the fact that we are people who are largely spending all this time, you know, on technology, it's going to affect our perceptions of those mediums. I mean, many people are now going to see a media like ceramic and painting with this new kind of frisson as somehow refreshing, or we're seeing in all these shops popping up in the big cities of household objects full of known provenance, because people sort of need this desire that something was made by hand. And I think we crave this now because we have a new reason for craving it that people 200 years ago wouldn't have had. So in this way, the technology is affecting the state of the collective unconsciousness. I don't agree that it's an absolute statement, but it's definitely increasingly true.
Yeah. And just to clarify, McLuhan was all about asking new questions and new metaphors on old questions. And he basically asked that as a question. And you got to realize that Woody Allen made him famous by putting him in Annie Hall.
Yeah, that's great.
Because Buñuel and Fellini said no. Did you know that? Yes. No. He was the third choice. And Woody made him say his key line as a statement and not a question. So he says, "You mean my whole fallacy is wrong?" And Marshall would always say it, "Do you mean my whole fallacy is wrong?" So it was all about questions. He didn't have theory. And so that's the problem. He teased people to believe his percepts were concepts. Yeah. He teased people. He wasn't saying concepts, but that was good. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Oh, I mean, we actually know this, and I don't freaking know the answer, but it is actually provable. The speed of light is clearly faster. Our processing speed is only 60 bits per second. It's fucking slow. I mean, we're not, you know, we're not plants, but I mean, impulses run through our body super fast. So, like, maybe like a pain thought is much quicker than that, but a brain thought is really slow. Yeah.
Audre Lorde said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Yvonne Rayner said, "You can if you expose the tools." What new tool do you suggest?
Oh my God. It's like going to the gym. Well, I don't know that I'm super heavily into novelty in and of itself, but I like the question. For me, I guess it isn't a new tool, but I think it's a tool that would be new to, since I'm here under the auspices of being a filmmaker, a tool that would be new to most people who come out of film schools, would be transferability. When you go to a school like Cal Arts, where I did my master's, there's a music school, on this part of the building, and a film school in this part of the building, and an art school in this part of the building. And when I was studying in the film school, it felt to me, some people probably will object to this, but like everything is inward facing. You studied film by studying a film, by studying a film, by studying a film. Whereas you go over to the art school and it's all outward facing. They're thinking about anthropology and mathematics and physics and geography, and they got they're doing the whole damn thing. And which is why I moved to art for my PhD, because that seemed like a much more fun conversation for me. And so the thing that I would encourage as a tool for younger filmmakers, if you don't want to make a film that seems like everybody else's, then don't have all the same references. Turn your back on movies and study from the whole wealth of human learning, because there are extraordinary answers in every other discipline, and you'll be surprised how high the percentages of those ideas that you can transfer back to what you're doing as an artist. And so transferability is my answer.
That's an amazing answer, because I was going to ask you just really quick, did you ever enter Ann Arbor Film Festival?
Never, no.
Yeah. So it's a bunch of James Benning clones.
Okay.
And then here's the funniest thing, you'll love this. Or whoever teaches all these great experimental filmmakers, Tom Anderson, the ones that taught you, and then across the country. And usually the person's first film is they're trying to clone their teacher, and that's their best film.
Yeah.
People don't like me saying that. It's unfair, because every year it's celebrating its 60th year next year, and we get stuff that's sort of new, that's sort of experimental, and it's fun, and it's important.
Well, I love James. I mean, he's my buddy, and I admire his films so much. And I was aware of the phenomenon that you just described. And so I was very conscious, even though I never spoke it, as a student, that out of respect for him, I have to come up with a completely different way, because I can't be another one of these people who just does a James Benning film.
Richard Linklater's first feature before Slacker?
I never saw that one. No,
it's on the Slacker DVD, dude. It is a total James Benning clone feature.
All right.
It's like, oh, I can do this. Now, all the power. I'm not criticizing him, but it is an amazing phenomenon. If you call a genre experimental, don't be cloning all the past guys, because you're supposed to. It's like Bruce Conner did it pretty good. He didn't go, why'd you do this? Because I didn't see anyone else doing it. That's what if you're going to genreize it. So, Curtis, what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Oh gosh. Well, I got medication for that now, so that I don't do that. I don't know. Yeah, the future is a real drag. I don't know if you thought about that. Money,
that's good. We'll leave it at that. The future. There's a great line: "The future ain't what it used to be." So,
that's for sure.
This is what McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound. Artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of what we invent. So studying you through your interviews, I think you're pretty tuned into that. There are hidden psychic effects of cinema, of music, of all these inventions, spoken word, printed word. And that if we turn to the artist, as Pound taught Marshall, that we can learn how to cope with what we don't like about some of these inventions.
Yeah.
They're not all tactile. They could be philosophy, words, bulldozers, cell phones, any invention, So we says you can turn to the artist and uncover these hidden psychic effects, but we still ignore them. Why do humans ignore the hidden psychic effects, even though we can look to the artist to expose them to us?
That's a good question. I mean, artists is of course a big group of people, right?
It means filmmakers,
Yeah,
TV makers.
yeah. But that's precisely my point, is that there's a lot of people who are artists. That's a big group of people. And I think generally we should never just, prima facie trust, the average of any big group of people, any demographic. It's too big a group of people, and there's a lot of malarkey that comes out of that big group of people. I think well, there's two problems that I see. Number one is that artists specialize often in non-paradigmatic answers. So if we're looking for like society-wide solutions, it would seem to me that those would tend to be more paradigmatic if we at least want them to be communicative. And so that would seem to me to be a problem. But I think that also I'm not sure of the degree to which artists are demonstrating that they're terribly interested in the general public understanding them. I don't know if you've ever read any artist statements, but if you want to hear a bunch of malarkey, just read a bunch of those. And I think it's, it's the negative effects of critical theory that have forced people into such a jargonization of the medium, which is already complicated by the fact that objects now are more difficult to understand than they were 200 years ago. So that if you're gonna pair that with a bunch of intentionally alienating language that's designed to score inside baseball points, it doesn't really seem that communicativeness is even your goal. And so I think maybe artists might want to ask why more people aren't turning to them to listen. And the answer might be right there at home.
Dude, this is beyond the beyond. In 40 years of doing this, you get it all. It really made me just quick diversion think of Buster Keaton hurting himself because he's in vaudeville, but not purposely hurting himself. Then you get to Mike Kelly at Cal Arts doing pratfalls and loving pratfalls because Buster Keaton was so cool. Then you get Chris Burden. Yeah. In my hometown, Venice, having himself shot, but don't shoot my arm. Oops, you missed. And Chris Burden, you watch the Burden documentary. This guy is very smart and a super artist, whereas people think he's and then was he doing it to become a famous artist or to be an artist or to do whatever's motive? Then you get Johnny Knoxville and Jackass, and these guys purposely hurt themselves to do the exact thing that's a through line from Buster Keaton to Chris Burden, and they make a lot of money. And the money pays for them fixing up their body. So what's the difference? Your malarkey word is, well, who comes out, in the long run happier? Or, Johnny Knoxville comes off as being a really smart kind of Burden or almost Keaton-esque kind of guy. But it's like, us intelligent artist types are like, ugh, it's Jackass. It's like, it doesn't seem to be, or almost like what the other guy does. It's agitprop as a
I mean, of course I never cared for it as cinema or anything because it doesn't care if you do. But I think that one thing that's really underrated, is proprioceptive genius, is the the ability to move and articulate your body in ways that are fantastic. And I mean, this is why I'm so obsessed with still watching surfing after all these years, or and it's why I love these movies that most filmmakers don't care about, like old movies by like Warren Miller or Albie Falzon, like Morning of the Earth and stuff, because it's all about this kind of proprioceptive performance, which, you got a bit in cinema with Chaplin and Keaton and Tati, but which, generally, doesn't rise to the fore as a thing that is taken as seriously. And I think there's something really socially and maybe evolutionarily productive about guys who are really super good at jumping off of bridges and buildings and, you know, doing all kinds of physical things like that to show us where the limits lie. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm someone who grew up on those old 16 millimeter physical genius films, and I love that stuff.
Well put. And Bruce Lee came to mind too.
Oh,
So
yeah.
Are you more afraid of new ideas or old ideas?
Oh, brother. Yeah. Now you're gonna get me called a reactionary or some. I mean, because of course you know that between you and me and an audience that we're going to put together is going to say that they're more afraid of old ideas, because obviously that's what you have to say. I mean, but I mean, I guess I'm just not really sure that temporality is even the best axis. I mean, in either direction. I mean, an idea should stand or fall on its own merits. So I don't really know that new or old is even the best increment. But like, in defense of old precedents, cumulative knowledge is super helpful. You don't want to keep burning yourself on the stove, and it's pretty handy that we have all this medicine and so on, and you know, that planes fly through the sky, or maybe that's not the best thing in the world, but you know what I mean. And, you know, but then at the same time, there are loads of path dependencies and corruptions and plastic that persist that we may want to do away with. And so, but then I guess my final ending, just one thing.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I don't know that I would be afraid of an idea. And I think this is really important in 2021. That too many people seem like they're afraid of ideas, when it's really the implementation of ideas that should cause fear, not the having of ideas or the discussing of ideas. And so, yeah, I wouldn't be afraid of just ideas in and of themselves in the first place.
That's brilliant. Because see, that's where I could, from this point on, start. Are you more afraid of the implementation of old ideas or the implementation of old? You know, that's where, when you help me psychoanalyze the question, the wording can change from this point on. And secondly, be aware, my mother, a very wise person, said, "Can I interview you, Mom?" She goes, "Yeah, but everything I say today, I might be different tomorrow." I goes, "That's
absolutely okay."
So I'm not holding you to this.
No, ditto to what your mom said. She and I sound very much alike. Yeah.
Right. And just because Clinton's hit a button and this is live on YouTube right now, and then it will be on YouTube till the end of time, then that doesn't mean you're being held to it. This is just like another pattern. But the idea question came from Cage and Kettering. Cage, right. I can't understand why people are afraid of new ideas. I'm afraid of the old ones. That's Cage. And then Kettering says, people are very open-minded about new things as long as they're exactly like the old ones. Okay, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Oh gosh, I mean, oh boy, why would people care about my memory? Well, I guess I have a memory. I'm thinking of two, and I don't know which came first, but they're interesting in different ways. One of them is, I remember being in a bathtub. I must have been about 3 years old, you know, before the age when you know how to dry yourself off. And I remember there was nobody there. There was no grown-up, and the water just kept getting colder and colder and colder. And I eventually at some point got out of the bathtub, and finally someone came to dry me off. But as an interesting thing about memory, it's total nonsense, this memory, even though I'm sure it happened, because this memory takes place in the bathroom of a neighbor of ours in a house that we didn't move into until I was 7. So it's a totally bogus memory, and it speaks to the unreliability of memory and leaves us wondering quite how memories are manufactured. One other that I'm sure is true, because my mother confirms it, is that I was sitting at the top of the stairs when I was 3, and my mother came out and she found me sitting there at the top of the stairs and asked me why I was sitting there. And I explained to her that it was because my grandma was staying with us, and she was down in the kitchen. And I said, if I went downstairs, she was going to really enthusiastically tell me good morning, and something to the effect of, I just wasn't ready to deal with that yet.
Wow.
And And it's extraordinary to think that that's something I would say now and that I said when I was 3. So as much as we are these ships of Theseus who change in so many ways over the course of our lives, then other things are just always in there. And so something like that.
Beautiful. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Oh, Jesus. I mean, it's easy to, I guess it would be easy to catastrophize and go with curse, but really most of memory is the basic stuff we need to, you know, function in the world. So obviously it's 99% a blessing.
Tell me one role model within your immediate family, someone who made an impact on you. Just briefly, what was that impact? And it's 2 parts: inside your immediate family and then outside your immediate family. Just briefly.
Oh gosh, inside my family. It's so hard because I mean, I've had, you know, multiple heroes in my family. I mean, I kind of consider my whole immediate family to be heroes of mine. I love all of them.
Well, give a couple of them. What's the main thing you got from them?
I mean, you know, I think that my father is a hero of mine. He died when I was 7. And in some ways I feel like he was some kind of a Rosetta Stone to, you know, my personal wetware. And it's been left largely, you know, understood as a result of his absence. But he was brilliantly talented. He did 3 degrees at USC in 4 years' time in business and math and architecture. And he was apparently this extraordinary thinker. And so he's influential in that I've always kind of chased that mystery. But then my stepfather is this extraordinary man who's so brilliant and loving and wonderful. And so, you know, I feel very blessed to have had him in my life as well. And then my mom is just a superhuman. So I don't know where we start there.
What would you get from your mom, say? Just one thing you got.
Oh my gosh, a sensitivity and an attention to detail and a desire to do things conscientiously and correctly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, outside your immediate family, just one. Doesn't have to be early, but sort of early.
I'll stick with early just since we're already there because it's too hard once I get older.
Okay.
From early, I have these memories of getting really into nature as a child. So like Marlon Perkins, maybe, you know, of like, you know, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. I mean, people outside of America who don't know him, he's kind of like, you know, like a meat and potatoes kind of David Attenborough sort of figure. And, but then there was this other guy who almost nobody knows about who struck me really strongly when I was a kid. And his name is Shad Northshield. And he was an ornithologist and he was a news producer, and he created that show CBS Sunday Morning. And while he was the producer, at the end, he was the one who shot those 2-minute segments where the TV just went silent and all you saw was nature for 2 minutes. And nobody knows this guy's name, but he's wonderful. And I remember even as a child just being transfixed by these, where all there would be on the screen was just the little logo, that little kind of psychedelic sun with kind of like the basalt column rays coming out of it, and just 2 minutes of nature. And it was like all of media just stopped for 2 minutes. And that really had a lasting impression on me.
Dude, I'm addicted to that show. My mom and I used to watch it years ago. I watch it with my wife religiously. It's like one of the only things we share. Like, okay, we got to watch CBS Sunday Morning. We picked like 2 or 3 of the segments and then we go, but we have to watch the nature one. Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. A
lot of the new ones are a little more screen savory than Shad's originals, but they're still good.
Oh, but it is a phenomenal. There's no voiceover. It's real sound. It's really a remarkable thing. If you think of TV as the false prophet, this is like going to church and being saved. Okay, do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Oh gosh, fucking hell. Excuse my language. Yeah, I mean, this is a moral philosophy question, isn't it? It's just not my stock and trade. It would seem to me that it all lies inside of all of us, and we endeavor to summon the better angels of our nature. But I think it's all in there.
Beautiful. I mean, that's the best answers for that is we're all capable of evil. But some people go, yeah, evil people exist and they're psychotic and blah, blah, blah. So
but I do think, if we're going complementarity there, I do think there is the possibility, for example, though, of people who are hardwired for evil. For example, we have these situations of people who will get a brain tumor, for example, and it will cause them to engage in some kind of antisocial behavior, and then the tumor's removed, and suddenly the antisocial impulses go away. And so there are both. There's character and there's also hardware, and so I think it can go both ways.
No, you're absolutely right. It's good, and that's what I like about you bringing up pattern recognition, because we attain comprehensive awareness. So it is possible to get the big picture and not just run through these, like I can say, well, everybody else, all the good people answer it this way, blah, blah, blah. Okay, Curtis, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I'm going to set up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK says, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. Fellini says, I need an enemy. So before you answer, how would you advise someone to deal with an enemy? How would you just respond to the Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I don't know that would apply necessarily in cases where an enemy was motivated by a lack of acknowledgement. And so I think we can start to author cases that would be exceptions to that rule, even though that may very well be a rule that applies often.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy?
I mean, again, this is moral philosophy and it's not my job, but I feel... Yeah, I mean, I don't want to give a kind of a folk theory here or something, but I think that with forgiveness and empathy and with love and with equanimity, being slow to anger, I know that that's easier said than done. But as I sit here, that's about the best I can come up with. It's just,
Good. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin over about 100 years ago, Volta Cinema. He checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
I'm glad this is the second time I have this question, because I really bombed it in an interview one time.
How did they word it?
I don't remember. But I mean, I'm reminded.
When you find out how they worded it, please send me. I'd love to hear.
I'll let you know. I'm reminded with this question of this quote from, I want to say it's a one-liner, but it's more than one line, but a joke from Stephen Wright, the great Stephen Wright.
Yes.
Who said, I got a new camera. It's very advanced. You don't even need it. To which his point is that you don't need to invent fictions. You just need to look.
Yeah.
But I don't think that is true, because, to get back to complementarity, often there are, two different ways that we have to approach a similar problem. Like, for example, if we want to measure the position and momentum of a particle, we can't do both at the same time, because the approach that measures the momentum changes the position, and the approach that locates the position changes the momentum. So sometimes it takes two solutions to get a full picture of a thing. And it just becomes very obvious when you're making films, both big commercial films with lots of money and more small, intimate films like what we're doing, that there are simply truths that documents can't reach. And a key for a fiction filmmaker is figuring out what those are. And I'm not going to give you a cheat sheet, but there are truths that documents can't reach. And we rely on fiction to illuminate those. I mean, so much of what we're doing with art, with poetry, with music, is we're going back into the intertidal zone of the hard problem of consciousness. Yeah. And, retrieving whatever we can and bringing it back, and as vividly as possible, depending on the success of the work, describing what it is that we found. And a document doesn't have the ability to do that particular kind of recon. And so I think that's probably why.
Beautiful. Curtis, so you walk me through just briefly your history of moving image. Did you grow up watching TV? You implied it by watching the TV shows. Seeing movies on what? VHS, HBO, or big theaters? And then what point did you go, oh, I want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I was a TV kind of junkie when I was a kid because I was a big drawer, and I would spend hours sitting in front of the TV. I mean, coming from school, my older siblings were at college, my mom was at work, and I would come home and just plant myself in front of the TV when I wasn't playing sports or playing with my friends or doing BMX or something like that. Or I was drawing and watching television. And so I really absorbed the kind of dominant culture of narrative from the time I was a child, and felt like I understood it pretty well, even when I was a kid. My first films I made because a friend of mine, whose name is Michael Palmieri, who's also a professional filmmaker now, he and I grew up in the same town, and his dad was sort of the only kind of cinephilic parent, I think, in the city that I knew of, at least. And he got us watching a bunch of pretty good movies, and got Mike this Hi8 camera. And Mike and I started making our first movies together when we were about 13. And we did that for a bit. And it's not like we made many, but we made a few, if I recall. I thought that I would study film at the University of Southern California as an undergrad, but after taking some courses there, I found that the stuff that they were teaching at the time, and I'm told that the program has changed significantly now, but the stuff that they were teaching at the time was purely a fast track to studio film and television, which I had no interest in. I didn't know how to articulate it because my primary education at that point was outsider music. And, but I knew that these movies they were showing me didn't feel as good as those records. And
hold for 1 second. Just name 1 or 2 films in 1 or 2 outsider music makers or films, just to give me a little ballpark. Like, what were those films Mike's dad showed you that like was there one?
Gosh, I mean, they were things that it was just the first time I can't remember what we would have watched, but like Fellini or Bresson or Antonio, these kind of things.
Fellini and Bresson, that's perfect. Yeah, now outside of music, like
that I was listening to at that stage. I mean, it's hard to remember kind of what the records were that were available, but kind of like Doug Snyder and Bob Thompson, or or things that are a little more mainstream, like The Fall and the Stooges and Captain Beefheart Can. But then eventually that would fall into ever more experimental stuff.
Yeah, good. Okay, so now you're making the they're Hi8. You're not making film, you're making video. Hi8 video. Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
So you're making those, and then you go to USC, and then you go, that's not for me. They're too business filmy.
Yeah, I didn't know what it was, but I quit film. But when you live in LA, there's all these jobs, and so I happened into jobs working as a crew member on sets, and got jobs working in art department. And next thing you know, they pull you in. It seems like you could write. How would you like to write something? And next thing you know, I was a working as a ghostwriter and was traveling around for 8 years writing scripts for people and treatments and concept ideas. And I did that for a number of years before I finally said, what am I doing this? This is not satisfying. And then I dropped out and went to Cal Arts and said, I'm going to do this directing properly.
But what kicked you over to say, I'm going to do this properly? What was the epiphany, or what was caused that?
Because because I learned a lot. I mean, when you work in commercial cinema, you learn a lot. Primarily, you learn what you don't want to do. And you become better and better and better at learning at what you don't want to do. And so you imagine films that are all that stuff taken away. Yeah. And that's a good place to start, I think. And I realized that if I was going to keep working, in this ghostwriter role, that was going to use up all of my time. And if I was going to be a director, that needed to use up all my time. And so I knew Tom Anderson and James Benning and other guys were at Cal Arts, and I said, I'm going there, and we're gonna do this for real.
Good. What a path. That's amazing. So a screenwriting teacher told me a great film or great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process?
Yeah, I mean, as far as those first two guys, I mean, one thing, you see it a lot. I mean, especially see it on, apps like Twitter or whatnot. You see all these filmmakers making all these muss and mustn'ts about, all these art rules, and I always think when I see people making art rules that they must be unaware of, the last 130 years of art history, which is one movement replacing another as the muss and mustn'ts of whatever movement it is now. People demonstrate really obvious exceptions to each and every one of those muss and mustn'ts, and it just keeps going on forever. So I think for artists, those kind of art rules are really just provocations for making things. But for me, I think that self-reflexivity is really important for me. I mean, I really love that stuff. I kind of eat it up. I mean, I'm still enough of a modernist, or I guess a hyper-modernist, kind of leapfrogging backwards over that postmodern stuff, that I love a good self-reflexive filmmaker. I guess in Los Angeles, I mean, sort of Morgan Fisher might be the king of the hill in that regard. Yeah. And that sort of thing really inspires me. But at the same time, I think there is also the potential that if one does self-reflexivity and exclusivity, there's the risk of reducing kind of your expressivity down to curt waves. And so I try not to let self-reflexivity be an orthodoxy or be everything. There has to be room. Well, in my work, it's not a rule for anyone else. In my work, I prefer that, and I know Anders does, we prefer that there's room for, expressivity and failure and comedy and a bit of stupidity. You mentioned Mike Kelly earlier, or people like this, yeah, I think most of my favorite artists kind of left room for stupidity in their final work.
Beautiful. When Duchamp said there's no art without an audience, how much do you think of the audience when you're making the art, when you're making your film?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I just don't find it very productive. I'm afraid that I just don't. I only can know, especially like when you're locked in an editing suite, 100 hours a week for 3 years, and you kind of lose all contact with your species anyway, or it feels like it sometimes. It becomes hard to think about an audience. I only know what's going to feel good to me. And I try to test that in as many different states as I possibly can, tired, awake, drunk, sober, whatever it's going to be. And, hoping that because I'm a Homo sapien, maybe some other Homo sapiens will like it too.
I talked to Michael Apted over 40 years ago. Rock videos were being big on MTV. Marty Scorsese was saying he cuts his films faster because of MTV. I'd said, Mr. Michael Apted, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? He says, because we've learned to take in information faster. I ask this with a bias. Can we indeed learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Yeah, of course we can learn to take in information faster. I mean, if you look at like video game competitions, I mean, those people are absolutely insane. Or if you watch like Olympic ping pong, I mean, I feel like, most of those people should probably just be rounded up and arrested. I mean, it's almost psychopathic to watch that ping pong. And, and so, yeah, we can train ourselves to think faster. Of course, we get to the hard limits of our processing speed, but yeah, we can think faster. But the question when you're making an art is then what is your aesthetic intent, and is your desire just to be perverse? And if it's not, then probably speed for speed's sake isn't going to be a very productive aesthetic endeavor.
Can humans literally multitask?
Well, yeah, of course. But we know from, I don't know who did the research on this, if it was Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, I don't know who did this, but we just know that our performance goes through the floor when we suck when we multitask, which is why I wish more people who write about film would be aware of how astronomically more difficult it is to direct a fiction film on a really tiny budget versus directing a film on a big one. Because on a multi-million-dollar film, the director is essentially like a queen bee larva who's just sitting there being catered to and is occasionally pointing and commenting. Whereas when you're making a film like The Works and Days, both Anders and I are each doing like 27 different roles, and we're in extreme sleep deprivation, and you're making all kinds of mistakes that you wouldn't normally make because you're going as far as a Homo sapien can go. And so we can multitask, but we're terrible at it.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to go off on the tangent too much, but did you ever read the New Yorker article on how Chris Marclay went nuts making his 24-hour film?
No.
Have you ever seen that film?
I have.
You know about it.
I know it exists, but I've not.
Christian Marclay's 24-hour film.
I've seen that film. I saw it at LACMA. Yeah, but only we went from like 11 p.m. to 1 a.m.
You watched some of it. So, but did you know? I mean, I think it's just not to go too far in tangent. He had the ability, because he could sell the DCP to LACMA for $1 million, to hire 12 or 15 people to go through every VHS and find this stuff. But he was so obsessively editing so much, sort of like what you talked about, you and Honors doing. You didn't have like a huge crew. You just had you and a couple, that he literally, even though he had this crew, went nuts making his film. So I
can see how that would happen. Because I mean, there was one chapter in my dissertation where I wanted to find every clock ever in an Ozu film, and it becomes a really obsessive activity when you do something like that. So I can see how that might happen. I mean, on a side note, we should say though that I think a film that more relates to what we do is Guitar Drag. I love that film.
Who's the maker?
Christian Marclay.
It's Guitar Drag film.
We love Guitar Drag.
Oh, I love that film too. Yeah. And so, what's the motive of the cave artist? Not what Herzog put or the New York article he based it on. Just your hunch. What was the motive of the cave artist?
Hell, I mean, I could give some cheeky answer that sounds contemporary, but I'm not going to do that.
No, I want just your gut, whatever you feel. Yeah,
just curiosity. I mean, I don't have any thing for that.
Good. You've accomplished a lot. How do you rate these three aspects: luck, skill, and ambition? Which played the biggest role, second and third, in your accomplishments?
Luck, skill, and ambition. Well, first of all, I would propose, if I could please, because it's something that I'm conscious of in my life, is to swap out one of those three words. I would swap out the word luck with the word probability. Because if you're only concentrating on luck, And I think people who obsess too much on luck, and we're seeing a lot of this right now, it's rather trendy. When people focus so much on luck, they get this sense that everything has an external locus of control. And when everything has an external locus of control, that is a recipe for anxiety and depression and lack of long-term fulfillment. And so what I would hope that we would try to do is also think of ways to claim an internal locus of control. So I would replace luck with the word probability. In other words, there are odds that a certain thing is going to happen, and through hard work, we can increase those odds. It doesn't mean we can take the odds to 100% and make everything perfect and fair. But if you change odds from 1% to 2%, you've doubled your chances. And so I think that the word luck eliminates the possibility for hard work. But at the same time, I would think probability is the biggest factor. Contingency is giant. And then what were the other two? Because nothing can be bigger than that. There was luck. What were the other two?
Ambition and skill.
Skill is the least important. I mean, for me,
Wow.
look at a band like Half Japanese or Beat Happening or or the Gods.
Shags.
Yeah, the Shags or the Gods. They demonstrated that. I think that virtuosity has had a really rough go of it for the last century. Because we used to put our virtuosos on stage like they were gods, and now we put our virtuosos on like America's Got Talent. So I really don't think that virtuosity in and of itself is where a young person might want to devote all their energy.
The question used to be, is ambition based more on fear or joy? And then I read Friedkin said, in Hollywood, luck and skill have nothing to do with anything. It's all ambition. So I changed the question, but I love what you said because it evoked Gary Player, the great golfer. He said, the more you practice, the luckier
you get.
Yeah, you know that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. T.S. Eliot said that poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
What language is my inner dialogue in? I don't even know what that means. Apparently not English, because
you beat Abigail Childs. You know her film? She's a great experimental filmmaker in New York. She said, I says, what language is your inner dialogue? And she goes, I wish I knew. That's good. Let's move on. So George Manupelli, started Ann Arbor Film Festival 60 years ago. He said his mantra is ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this just comes through me. I know it's both and it depends, but Curtis, is art making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever dominant technology or culture is currently present?
Now we're back to philosophy of mind, aren't we? And we're grappling with determinism and the degree to which we have free will or don't have free will. Yeah. And I think, of course, the dominant view in philosophy right now is that we, in fact, do not have free will, that it's probably some sort of an illusion, but then you have people like John Searle who say, absolutely not. We damn well have free will. If I think I want to raise my arm, I raise my arm and it goes up. And so I don't know that I know the answer, but I think I think Frank Wojciech's answer is the best on this, maybe, which is that, again, we go with complementarity, because it's not, do we have free will or not free will? The answer is both.
Yeah. Good. And so can art making be egoless?
Oh gosh, I should have paid more attention in school. I don't know what that means. Yeah, I guess not. There's always going to be some, no matter, I'm trying to think of conceptual experiments that could be edge cases to that statement. But I think that at some point, there's always going to be some little particle trace, no matter what you do. Even if you're making like security camera movies or something. Yeah.
Was Freud right?
Yeah, I don't know anything about Freud. Um,
Good
yeah,
answer.
yeah.
Is perception reality?
Is perception reality? That's another playful phrasing. So it depends how we're defining reality, and whether we're thinking of reality as a thing, that is true. Like, what is truth? What is reality? And like these like computational, like constructivist math types, they can sit around and play reality games with each other. For example, like they can make a model that can be predictive or non-predictive, or they can make a mathematical statement that's true because it's defined as true under certain conditions, or, I don't know. And I think that's not entirely an unpersuasive case, what they're thinking about, or this kind of ground truth that something seems to be happening instead of nothing. That's the big one. I mean, that's amazing that probably something is the default. But then you're getting yourself into a wormhole of philosophical debate on this stuff. And so if we wanted to like neatly define the parameters and constraints, we'd start with Descartes and go to naive realism and representation theory and all that business and let it run through the centuries for a while. But, the Paleolithic hardware that we're running has given us sense organs that are in some way a marvel, but in other ways are poor at perception. And it leaves huge swaths of our universe unperceived or misperceived. For example, if our mathematics are correct, we are unable to perceive most of the dimensions in our universe. And so right there, we find ourselves living inside of some kind of flatland, the romance in many dimensions, this children's story where all the characters are two-dimensional geometric shapes, and they can't even conceive of a third dimension. Well, if we have 11 dimensions, we'll just multiply that outward, and that's us. So, I mean, but then, there are, the pros are going to break it down into sensed atom and intentionalist theory and all this mumbo jumbo. And then rightly, you'll have people who will say that what good is this fancy pantry? I mean, I wake up, I get out of bed without falling. I walk down the stairs without falling. I make my coffee without burning myself. I drive to work without crashing. I mean, we can send men to the moon. So that's proof that we can grok things pretty well. And so obviously our senses tell us a whole heck of a lot about, what's real, even if some of the details are off. It's pretty darn informative. And I think that's probably good enough to get most people by, including me.
Yeah. Well put, Curtis. Thank you. And it also evoked, if you haven't seen this film, definitely look it up. Bruce Conner's favorite experimental film. It's a fake experimental film by Coleman Miller called Uso Justo. And I asked Coleman, is perception reality? He goes, that's all you got.
No, but that's absolutely true. I mean,
Isn't that a great answer?
True. Yeah, it's not very good, but it's the best damn thing we've got, and that's all there is. And so that's the answer for this human, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah. And your answer also evoked, and I really appreciate you being philosophical and articulate, but you're also playful, and I'm getting what you're saying. At least I think I am. And I appreciate it. I mean, it's the way you're expressing it feels to me that I'm getting it. It's really nice.
It's just me trying to work it through,
Yeah. And so McLuhan learned from Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce that artists dream while they're awake. Now, not to be elitist, but everybody uses this time to sleep to work out some sort of scenarios. Everybody dreams, but artists can also dream while they're awake. And it's also what you just touched on was how Robert Anton Wilson explained Finnegan's Wake. It's like playing chess on 4 different chess boards that are on top of each other, but it's not 4 different games. You're jumping the different layers. So when you said 11 dimensions, it was interesting. Do you know if dreams have played a role in your creative process?
Yeah, it wouldn't be immediately clear to me how that would be so if it's true, other than that maybe dreams are used to prepare us for situations that we've not yet faced. And I know that I am a much more restless dreamer while I'm in the middle of making something like, you know, like a film where you have to be prepared for contingency every day. So only in that way, but not in some cosmic, like aesthetic way.
Yeah. Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Well, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I think one thing I've been thinking about this week is like how far I can run an idea up to impossibility, which would be panpsychism. You know, I mean, this idea of whether consciousness is just innate all the way down to the particle level in our universe. And I'm unpersuaded that this is true, but I'm interested in pushing this to the edge of possibility and possibility. Like for example, like, you know, I'm comfortable with the fact that it stretches all the way across the animal kingdom, but I'd also like to reserve the possibility that it could extend into the plant kingdom. And I mean, if we think of something like Pando, you know, Pando, it's this big kind of colony grove of quaking aspens that look like a woods, but they're quaking aspens are actually connected underground. So it's just one giant tree. And even with what would have to be really slow processing speed of plants, given its age, I am interested in whether there may well be something that it's like to be Pando, or whether there may be something that it's like to be a bristlecone pine, or so on. I mean, who's to say? But that's a kind of threshold of possibility that I've been thinking about.
Really well put. Thank you. And Sunra said, the impossible attracts me. The impossible attracts me because everything possible has been done and the world didn't change. Tell me one major element of your creative process that's changed since you started, and one major element that stayed the same. Just briefly, you know.
Well, I'll start with the one that stays the same because that's the easiest, which is that, you know, we haven't changed the fact that we hope to make things that can be received well to an audience or to a critical reception, but that fail as products. And we've done a really good job of that, especially the latter one. And so, yeah, this desire to fail by the demands of the dominant economy, that's something that stayed the same. Something that's changed. Well, we've gotten a bit more, you know, we got a little bit more courageous. You learn and you grow. And, you know, we made, you know, one film where you try just a couple things and you try to do those really well. And with each film, you add a few more things. And so I think the change is really just additive.
Beautiful. You evoke Paul Schrader's great line, the job of the artist is to attempt to sell out but fail.
Yeah, well, we never even tried that.
I'm not laughing. I don't mean to laugh like I'm laughing at you. Sorry.
Okay.
I just love, you know, I come from that Beckett world, you know, fail, then fail better, you know.
No,
and
no, which is great. I'm so glad you brought that up because it's something that I brought up in this conference paper that I wrote at there was some conference at Goldsmiths, and I talk about how, and this relates so much to our work, that often you will hear people bring up the Beckett quote of, you know, fail, fail again, fail better. But our goal when we are making things, Anders and I, at least according to the ideas of the dominant economy, is to fail and fail again and fail worse.
Yeah.
And that's a really important distinction, and it's what kind of drives us.
Believe me, that's beautiful. Have you seen that film, Not Film, about the documentary by what's his name? It's a doc, huh? No, it's a doc on the only film that Beckett made.
Oh no, I don't know about that.
Check it out. It's called Not Film. It's a feature doc, and it teaches, you know, what you talked about is deep because, you know, Beckett probably isn't like Joyce, isn't as understood as people think they are understanding him. You know, I think Beckett is and he gets to be a catchphrase like Joyce and like McLuhan. They're all like, you know, I think people like you help me understand understand things because you're comprehensivist. You're like, just because it becomes a slogan doesn't mean it means this, you know. Like I was going to ask you about this. This is, I interviewed this great poet, Amy Gersler, last week. And I said, because she's, what's the function of poetry? And then I says, well, how do you process this? And I would like you to process it in terms of filmmaking old poetry. Louis Bersani's Mallarmé study, he said, the very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition. So almost like put it in filmmaking, the very crises which threatens the making of a film sustains the filmmaking. So she was trying to tackle it, but she goes, well, what's the context? I goes, I don't know. I just yanked the line out of the context. Now she's legit in saying that. Totally. And I should go back. But do you get the statement, and does it mean anything to you or resonate, or can you react to it?
I mean, I can't say with certainty that I get the statement, but I can interpret the question and give an answer.
Yeah, that's what I mean. If you can,
especially, as an American filmmaker, I mean, if you really want to think hard, make a list in your head of American art house feature filmmakers, not indie filmmakers.
Yeah.
You won't need your second hand. The thing that makes things difficult to make are going to be forces of usually economics, but other types of corruptions, and the ability to describe those things with a film becomes a new reason, and it constantly refreshes itself. It's harder and harder to survive making fiction feature films that are not part of the Hollywood indie continuum. But then that gives you all the reasons you need, because the limitations are revealed in the form if you turn them into virtues. Carolee Schneemann made this great piece called Up to and Including Her Limits. And I love the including her limits bit. And so it's constantly showing, the failure of the economics of the situation, in our case, $900 video cameras that give you all kinds of sensor error and bullshit that, you wouldn't have had there, if you could have controlled it, but you can't. And leaving in those sorts of failures, or the kinds of failures that come from just being 4 people instead of being, 64 people. Those kind of urgencies are the problem and are the reason. And there are people like Jean-Marie Straub, I think, who has pushed that farther and longer than just about anyone I can think of. Yeah.
No, it's beautiful. I've shown experimental films for 40 years in Venice to homeless people and industry people. And when an experimental filmmaker writes their blurb, I say, look, nobody's going to come, or a few people are going to come, and it's speaking to the choir. But if you want to get some more people, put in your blurb. It's kind of like John Waters and David Lynch, because then they'll go, oh, experimental film is weird. And if you can get them in the door, they might open up. Like when I showed Mike Kelly's feature film to like 5 people.
Which one was that?
It's his only feature. It's an amazing.
Was it the yearbook movie?
Yeah, it's an amazing.
It is pictures from the high school yearbook.
It is not like Cindy Sherman or that other guy Schnabel, an artist making a feature film. It's Mike making art, but it's disguised as a feature film. I had maybe 10 or 20 people there, and half of them are homeless. And this guy comes up to me and says, he knew nothing about experimental film or experimental art. And he just goes, that was amazing. So, it was enabling somehow. How do you get these people in the door? It's just like, if I showed your film, at Beyond Baroque down the street, all 8 hours, in a venue, how am I going to get people there? I'm going to say, well, it's like Christian Marclay. They go, well, who's he? You know, oh, it's like Warhol. Oh, I hate Warhol. You know, they'll, you know, so how do you give them a reference? Oh, it won a big film festival prize. Well, you know, it's like people looking at, this is how people learn film, sort of, by the blurb.
Yeah.
Go into, there used to be, they go into the video store and they read the container, you know, they read the box, and then it's, now you hit this little Netflix thing and it scrolls down and it has one sentence. What is the sentence going to be for your new film, Curtis? Like the one sentence, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be what you're looking for, because we write intentionally anodyne descriptions, because we're not salesmen and we're not trying to be. It's like a catalog description, or it's like how some, you know, like a government clerk would describe the movie. It's just the facts of the situation, and that's it. And so that's the way we do it. That
was good. I've skipped over so many questions because I really want to get the meat of this, and this has been great. So we have gone about 90. Are you willing to do 15, 20, or 30 more minutes? Just give me a ball.
Whatever feels good to you. It's fine.
Okay, I want, you know. Okay, so Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength. So it's literally possible to take a weakness and turn it into a strength, rather than overcome a weakness. Like we're taught, oh, overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness that you've incorporated into a strength.
Well, I'd copy and paste the thing that I just said about failure and Carolee Schneemann, and this idea of the way that we intentionally incorporate failure into what we do. I guess another one, I mean, God, weaknesses that we use as strength. I mean, I think at some point, you know, you take an honest stock of yourself, and I recognize that I'm probably more of a gifted introvert than extrovert. So you plant yourself behind the camera and you take that role. And so that's a way I think film directing can be a real outlet for people, you know, kind of that, in that sort of persuasion. I mean, maybe not as much as, certain art practices, like Eva Hesse or something like this, although she was pretty social, but you know, but still there's, something about, getting behind a camera instead of getting in front of it, which I think is probably, you know, in this day and age, a healthier route anyway. Yes.
And thank you. Anger can be a productive emotion when, fill in the blank.
Oh boy. When it's directed at yourself, I would hope, because you haven't done something yet today that sucks, or you haven't pushed yourself hard enough, or so on and so forth. I mean, when I made this 8-hour film, you know, within the window of my PhD, I mean, I was the first person in that building every morning and the last person in that building almost every night for at least the last 3 or 4 years that I was there. And, you know, I would wake up every morning at 5:30 and immediately put on like a David Goggins video or something, or like a Jocko Willink video, and, you know, get these guys yelling at me to get up out of bed and get your shoes on. And so I think in that way, if it's directed at yourself, there are ways it can be productive.
On what occasion do you lie?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Surprise parties.
Can you forget to die?
I mean, if David Sinclair has his way, then I would hope that indeed could happen. You know, I mean, I'm taking my NMN and resveratrol every day, and so we'll see what happens. But I hope so. but probably, if we're being honest, that's probably more of a fantasy for our grandchildren.
What's the most significant difference between men and women, physical aside?
Oh gosh. I don't know. I'm coming off like such a contrarian with these because I keep wanting to interrogate the questions, even though they're beautiful questions.
No,
Be-
that's
because-
fine.
be- be-
I appreciate that more. You know, that's fine to interrogate the question, believe me.
because I mean, I'm immediately drawn when I hear questions or when I hear like, because there's so much of it at the moment, these instincts of division by whatever innate property, that, you know, I find myself much more drawn to this kind of Pauli Murray impulse that says, you know, if you draw a small circle that excludes me, I will draw a larger circle that includes you. And this kind of emphasis on our common humanity rather than our differences, I think, for me, feels well, it feels clearer to me how to be productive in that direction.
Dude, that's exactly, you know, that question is sort of like this. You know, I'm smart assy. Sometimes I'll go, well, there's no right or wrong answers to any of my questions, but that one you got right. So, you know, about 1 to 2% of people, no, maybe like 75% of people will say, well, men are linear and they hold in their emotion, and women let it out and they're more emotional and feeling based. And then about 25% will say there's no difference. They just want to say, I don't want to do that. And I say that's fine, because the way I question it, you know, it's like along with that, which I try to avoid, but I'm trying to study, is what caused matriarchy.
Are you asking me that question?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious, you know, and that goes along.
What caused matriarchy with an M?
Yep.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not a sociologist. You must be referring to civilizations which we know have existed, which were matriarchal instead of patriarchal. You know, but I'm afraid I don't know enough about that to comment specifically on that. I mean, you know, I've made 2 films now that were sort of criticisms of a kind of patriarchal order, but I don't know what causes matriarchy. I mean, in my family, you know, it was the death of a father. But you know, I think an anthropologist can have much more interesting things to say about whatever these matriarchal societies were in the past.
Yeah.
That gets outside of my expertise.
But it's like interesting. My friend, I say, well, I could have asked it like I asked him, Eric McLuhan, Marshall's son, what caused patriarchy? And he says, men. And it's like, no, biology caused matriarchy or patriarchy. Maybe that's the answer. And then I asked a couple of weeks ago, my friend, he says, what caused matriarchy? He says, matriarchy never existed. There's elements of women being ruling, but it didn't, you know, we think, oh, that's when women run the world. And, you know, the flip of it is the word mafia starts with the 2 letters M-A. That's because women run the world and they let men think they run the world. Now, that's a funny little joke, and I'm not trying to promote it as a truth or anything. No. I said it to a reading group, and this one woman who's very well-read, smart lady, she goes, don't reveal our secret. Which is, again, you know, who should run, you know, like who's into, like, go to this one then. Anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. That's Utah Phillips. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Oh, bloody hell. Really, we're just dancing around the university, kind of going to every department where I don't study. You know, we just left the sociology department. Now we're in the anthropology or political science department. You know, and I don't just want to give these, you know, glib kind of answers when I know that people have done hard work on this stuff just probably down the street. But who's entitled to make the rules? Well, gosh, I don't know. It really depends. I don't have a universal answer, and I'm going to get in trouble if I say, yeah, I'm afraid I don't know that I have an answer on that one.
That's all right. And this is
Yeah.
this is the beauty of it, is I'm not asking these questions to be put into the context of people who are smart and know and studied this. I'm asking because I find you an articulate human who's willing to share, time and energy in discussing things. So it's not
Yeah.
like they don't know more than you, in my opinion.
But I think part of that is sometimes being willing to know when to shut up. And
that's what you're doing.
And so sometimes I'm willing to do that too.
Yeah. And that's why I say, in my suggestions to this interview, I say saying I don't know or pass is totally legit. And I hate to suggest pass, because I don't like when people go pass, but I have to, someone told me as a courtesy, you should tell them that, especially when you're in front of an audience and doing this. If we were doing it, it's different, because people are like, oh, well, I'm in, we are in front, but we don't see him. But one question I wanted to ask you that I do ask in that pre-suggestions was, if you're at a cocktail party, and just does it depend on who it is, they go, oh, so what do you do? What do you usually say?
Oh gosh, I mean, it's just easiest to say I'm a film director. It's short. It's 2 words. It gets it done.
Yeah. Okay. How do you find peace of mind?
Oh yeah, probably the way that Anders and I met, which is walks. I think walks is the big one. That's how we became buddies, walking around that island and Sweden, and walking through the woods and walking around Yellowstone Park and walking around the meadow over here and walks. Yeah.
Beautiful. There's a line that goes, you create what you resist. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into you are what you hate. James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. But of course, Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. What does this mean to you, or how would you process this? You create what you resist. Not you, Curtis, but one creates what one resists.
I mean, we see this playing out right now in the social dilemma, of kind of social media, where essentially, I feel like we're in a time where we're at what feels like an impossible impasse sometimes, because everyone is so keen on turning everyone else into only the most extremely negative caricature. It makes it hard to have a conversation when we will only straw man each other and not steel man each other. And so I think that that's a kind of important thing, even though I can't remember what the question was.
It's great. Let's just move on, because it's totally cool. I like that you can reference Ernst Lubitsch and Billy Wilder and Howard Hawks and a bunch of other great filmmakers who aren't in the Hollywood genre. And I think there's a line that McLuhan says is, if it works, it's obsolete. And I always said, well, that's Hollywood. If it works, it's obsolete. It doesn't work, but it's not obsolete. And you said a line that goes, Hollywood is honest about what it does. And I really appreciated that line, because then you went into this thing about indie, and I appreciated you separating indie and art films with us presently today. How would you react to Louis Buñuel's, I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it?
Oh, that's great. I mean, you've heard me already iterate something like that here today when I was decrying, certitude, I mean, I think when we try to understand things, I mean, I think it's really helpful to have things in a kind of flow chart of possible answers that are weighted to the best of our ability. But I think anyone who's seriously thinking about anything, in most cases will have the ability to entertain any number of possible answers simultaneously, kind of weighted by likelihood according to the best of our ability. But I think part of I think that's just part of thinking actively and seriously.
If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Buy a bunch of Bitcoin in 2011.
Should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Over.
Why?
I mean, because I'm not a psychopath.
It's on the patent too. 100 years ago. Curtis, if a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Oh gosh. No, that's too bad that I don't have something for this one, because I'm sure some people give you a bunch of clever ones, don't they? I don't know. That's what it'd be called. I don't know.
They want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell would it be?
The glue, cedar.
And they want to have a color ink for some of the pages instead of black ink. What color?
Oh shit. God, where's this language coming? That's terrible. Yeah, that's really good, because I would want it to be a self-reflexive solution. Like, I'm not going to answer this question, but I'll answer a really close one if you got a minute.
Please.
Like for example, we disallow, and I want to answer this because nobody ever asks it in Q&As. By devaluing narrative in our films, even though they're fiction, we deprive ourselves of a number of the tension techniques that are common in classical cinema. And so we're constantly looking for any way we can to include tension into the work. And so when we're doing the titles, initially they were just white on black, like this default. But then the idea came that no, this would be a chance, at least in a small way, to introduce some tension. So we took a still frame of every shot in the film, ran it through an average blur so that there was a single color, did the math and found the average CMYK value for the whole film and put that into a single rectangle. And then we wanted to find the most dissonant color to the average color of our film. So first we went to the other side of the color wheel, but then obviously immediately realized that that was the complementary color. What we needed to do was go 90 degrees east and west on the color wheel to get to the solstice points, then convert back to CMYK and flip the K value, which is the tonality. And then we ended up with the two colors that were most mathematically perfect, two most annoying colors or dissonant colors relative to our film. And there was this anemic hot pink and this anemic kind of barfy orange. And then having self-reflexivity go as far as it could, we made the taste-based decision for the orange. And so that's a story about choosing color of ink.
That was really good, because it also evoked, Billy Wilder said, black and white is more true than color. Any comment?
I mean, that's not true.
Very, yeah. But I think he said it because we've seen black and white longer on Earth than we have on color in regards to photographs and movies. That's why we're tuned to knowing, a black and white photo sort of rings of truth more than a color photo.
That seems a problem to me if it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Caution.
Very good. So we should go into, since you did that color thing off my stupid ending questions, we should go into music for a second. But let's do a few more of the stupid questions. If a statue is built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
Oh, where would I mean, like Antarctica and like I don't know, sawdust or something that would biodegrade.
Tell me something.
Yeah.
That's good. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
That you never, something good that you never had and you never want. Who was it? Was it Seneca or Marcus Aurelius who said that, you know, to not desire a thing is as good as having it. So, I mean, just about any kind of luxury item like that, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, you're just as wealthy by not wanting it.
Yeah, you know, the three answers I get the most are fame, money, and heroin.
Well, I don't know, boy.
But you know what Mike Kelly said?
Definitely fame. I mean, that's no good. That's only bad. I mean, it's mostly bad, I think, probably.
Yeah. But Mike Kelly said, I said, tell me something good you never had and you never want. He said, kids, children. You know. Okay, and I like this one too, but it sort of goes along with you saying shit, which wasn't bad at all. You feel comfortable using the language you want. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
My gosh, Gerry. I mean, this is, you know, this is no longer a family show. I mean, this is, I mean, what can you do in that situation? I mean,
you're answering a question with a question. You win, Curtis.
You just got to take it, man. I mean, at that point, I mean, you know, yeah.
Well, I got to go back to Mike Kelly. He said, cry. But my favorite answer ever was a woman on the Venice boardwalk. She said, I'd take the velocity of the bag of shit coming at my head and I'd use it to swoop my way out of the vat of vomit. I says, dude, that is like The Descent in the Maelstrom by Edgar Allan Poe. He studied the pattern.
Okay.
Studies the patterns, and instead of being swooped down to his death, he gets himself out of there.
Yeah, so, well, I think, as is often the case, Mike's answer is for me the winner.
Mike's was really beautiful, but
what a guy! I mean, what an amazing guy.
Amazing, but you know, I went to college with him at University of Michigan, and he had allowed me 2 interviews over a 10-year difference, and the third one was going to be 10 years later, and it was like the 9th year he commits suicide, and I was like, and this isn't right, but I was like, dude, you're stupid. You're too smart a person to commit suicide. And people knew he was very emotional. One of my interviews, he started to cry when I asked him this question in front of all these people. And he was an emotional guy, but it was like, you know, as like, you want to reason with them like that, you know, it's like, I don't want you to do this, but I don't think you really want to do this.
Yeah.
You don't want to, you know, so, but we don't have a right to tell other people what to do.
No.
But at the same time, it's like, you know,
it can be hard down in there. Yeah. It can be hard down in there. I mean, I didn't know Mike personally, but I was really saddened by that one because I admired his work so much.
Yeah. So let's go to music for a second and just soundtracks, because it's amazing how tuned you are to, you know, the one thing that really impressed me was you go, we don't want them to know if it's like some binaural vaporwave music soundtrack, or the air conditioner soundtrack.
You know, I didn't say that, but I said sometimes you can't tell if it's the drone or an air conditioner.
Yeah. But it is amazing because the bringing up what Morgan Fisher. If you could explain what you learned from Morgan Fisher's, because I don't understand the null set. So maybe just say what it is he says. What does null set mean in that?
Yeah, Morgan's amazing. He made this film that Gerry's referring to called Picture and Sound Rushes, where he sits at a desk next to a clock. And he explains the 4 kind of states of a film, or the 4 that he proposes, which is picture with sound, picture with no sound, sound with no picture, and the null set. So the null set would just be no sound, and I guess his version of no picture would mean a black screen. But then you could see someone argue that it would be clear leader. But in the case of this film, if I recall, it's a black screen. It's been some time since I've seen it, but the principles really resonate with me. And so that's what the null set is. It's no sound, no picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
but yeah, go ahead. Like in regards, you could just suss out how much do you think about your soundtracks? I mean, what's the process?
A fucking ton. I mean, a ton.
Like 50-50 picture and sound, or are you?
Are you talking now just about the sound design, like the actual sound?
Well, no, I mean, it can go anywhere. I don't have a specific. I'm just curious at the things I heard you say about sound.
Yeah, well, sound.
Interest in the music you came out of. That's some of the musicians like Alvin Lucifer. I interviewed Alvin. I mean, it's interesting. You didn't, named Hollywood film directors, but you didn't name film composers like Bernard Herrmann or something. You named this other kind of music that's like not normally thought of in film. So
So I mean, if we're purely talking about the music part, I'll leave the sound design out of it for now, even though that's very extensive in our films and people comment on it a lot because it's more prominent than you're used to getting in a movie. I think a lot of what we're doing, I mean, part of why the reason the film is 8 hours is because it was a matter of getting the events in the film down to a kind of place of equanimity where the wavelengths between salient events are quite long so that we feel them less jerkily or less dramatically or less kind of teleologically. And so part of choosing a bunch of drones in this case wasn't because I mean, this is a mistake that I see a lot of, or I shouldn't make art rules for people, but a thing that I don't enjoy in a lot of contemporary movies where music supervisors get to work is they try to choose sort of the cleverest or the coolest or the trendiest music or whatever to be in this thing, or the smartest reissue or whatnot. We weren't interested in what was fashionable. We were looking for a kind of music that would disrupt the film as little as possible while still being present. So, for example, there's a scene of a plane that flies around. And I said, I need to find a piece of music that sounds the most like that plane. And originally I found David Rosenboom's Brainwave music. And it was almost like, it almost perfectly mirrored the sound of this plane so beautifully so that I could cut the plane and the music together to where you couldn't tell the difference between the two. And then we had correspondence problems, David and I. I think he was really busy at the time, so it was very long between emails, and I had to make a decision. And I finally realized that also one of Alvin Lucier's tracks did the same thing for Music on a Long Thin Wire. And then I found that, for example, like a Phil Niblock trombone track sounded almost exactly like the sound of the washing machine in the garage. And so what I was trying to do was find sounds that consistently mirrored things that were present in the built landscape. And so that's kind of how we went about choosing the music. And a lot of times, because sounds are sustained that are mechanical, it just happened to be drones that sounded most like these objects.
Yeah. No, that was good. And it's like you said this thing of what's the ESL at Harvard, and a sensory
ethnography lab.
Sensory ethnography, lab. That's what it is. SEL, right? And you said, well, we're sort of that. Now, one thing I observed, I thought that was great. Did I get that right? You said sort of sensory. You're sort of SEL?
No, I don't think we are. I don't think we
No,
are.
but I think, anyways, yeah. So
I know what you're talking about. I was referring to something else where I said that there's a tendency in contemporary film for what I referred to in that interview as sort of ethnography, which is like sensory ethnography, but without having to do all that homework. But I was not including us in either of those two categories, because I think we're doing something else altogether because we're focused on fiction. We just don't have those academic ethnographic concerns. I mean, to some degree, yes, but for the most part, we're fiction filmmakers. It's a different ball of wax.
Good. I'm glad that you clarified it. But I've seen their films at the Ann Arbor Film Festival. You know, they've gotten out there, and some of them are intriguing. And the one about the boat has this amazing, you know, it's like, I don't want to be on this boat for 90 minutes. It was just like
Leviathan.
It was an amazing experience.
Yeah, but it's like a noise film.
But then you learn when you're at a film festival or you're talking with the makers that there's huge sound design there. Whereas though to the normal viewer, it appears is what you're seeing is what is on the soundtrack. It's not enhanced.
No way.
And they enhance, but to me, it's like cheating documentary. Or that cheating's not the word. Enhancing a doc. So like, Frederick Wiseman doesn't enhance the sound of some kid screaming in a jail cell. So they enhance it, but they don't tell you that. So, you know, recently in that chef documentary that just came out, you know, Morgan Neville used AI voice. Did you hear about the controversy?
I don't know about that.
They took Anthony's voice, and they have so much footage of him anyways, but they wanted him to read one of his emails that revealed a key line. So they fed his voice into an AI, had the AI read it, but they didn't tell anybody. So then it came out, well, they did it. And he goes, well, big deal. I didn't feel I had to tell. So it's like that, you know, it's like Herzog paying people to be in his documentary to do something. You know, do artists have a moral obligation? Sorry.
Do we have a moral obligation? Oh, okay, that's the question. I mean, I don't want to weigh in on that AI thing because that just doesn't sound interesting to me. But in terms of like Lucian and Verena doing sound design, it's a work of art. It's an expressivist exercise, and this, you know, as much as I'm a modernist at heart, this 20th century modernist idea about purism is, you know, is not interesting to me as a hard and fast rule. Art can be purist if you want, you know, and a number of works I can think of would be sort of purist in this regard, like the early documentaries of Krzysztof Kieslowski, which most people haven't seen. Which are almost like reportage, but I really don't believe in these hard and fast rules about kind of 20th century documentary purism or this kind. It just seems like this kind of overweening clinging to like a 90s indie sensibility of kind of keeping it real or this kind of thing, which is it just doesn't for what we do, it doesn't feel very interesting. I like the fact that Verena and Lucian will do a sound design. I like the fact that in our films, what you are seeing is not true. We don't do hybrid documentary fiction. We have 1,600 roughly shots in our film. 2 of the shots in the film are documentary. You know, if you think of a film like Kiarostami's Close Up, you know, you have the couple shots in the courtroom and the shot at the end. Otherwise, every shot in the film is a fiction. So it's a fiction film. And we are doing fiction, and the world you are seeing is fictional. If you look at a James Benning film, you know, that seems about as pure as cinema can get, right? But none of it is, well, in most of his films, it's not sync sound. He records the sound after, and he designs it, and he edits it. He makes an artwork. And when you're making an artwork, And it is labeled as such, and it says this is a dramatic fiction, or so on. It ought to be taken as such. And yeah, these kind of art rules I just find really tiring.
I appreciate what you're saying deeply. And when we first saw James Benning in Ann Arbor, when he first entered that first film and then became the darling of the festival for many years, we thought that sound went with the cross country, that coming out of the radio, what we were hearing was, it seemed to come together so pure that's we fell into that experience.
Right, man. He's an expressivist. He's a maker. He's an artist.
Yeah. So just quickly, how does what you just said apply to Sans Soleil by Marker and F is for Fake by Orson Welles?
Different people and different solutions, I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't spend too much. I don't know if I have anything interesting to say on either of those guys. Other than, I mean, it's art rules. You don't need them, and when you start pushing these rules, you're going to find people who are going to come up with all kinds of obvious ways to break whatever rule it was you made for them. And Wells was brilliant. I mean, to his own career difficulty at thumbing his nose at musts and mustn'ts, and God bless him. I mean, it cost him dearly, unfortunately, but it's great that that he was able to have that attitude.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to close out now, Curtis. I've really appreciated your time and energy here. Just a couple last ones. Joseph Boyce says, make the secrets productive. Lou Welsh said, guard the secrets, constantly reveal them. But as Thornton Wilder in 2080 said, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards out on the table for 2 hours, and I really appreciate it. I'm not insinuating you haven't answered this already, but what's it really all about for you?
My gosh, another big question. How are we going to do this one, man? I mean, when it comes down to this kind of thing, like what's it all about, sort of, I find it hard not to be pulled into the feeling that it's all pretty absurd. The whole grand scheme of things feels so absurd. But then, like someone like Thomas Nagel had this idea that while it might be true that nothing, this idea, it might be true that nothing matters, but our minds are made in such a way that we don't seem built to think about that answer for a very long time. So we slide back into locating importance and meaning and purpose. And we want to offer reasons or justifications for the whole thing and for our place in the whole thing. And I think in this situation, somewhat understandably, most people will be lured into offering up some kind of noble, high-minded narrative in which they cast themselves as the hero. But I just don't know if I have the energy for that. I mean, since I'm thinking of Nagel, he had this other idea that life only seems absurd when viewed from the outside, but we don't live life from the outside, do we? We live it from the inside. And so we give ourselves reason. We give ourselves narratives that we can aspire to live up to so that we can navigate this whole charade, with some kind of sanity, which makes me now sound like Norm Macdonald, who is also a good philosopher. But, I'm not getting ready to go down to the rope store. I'm just saying that life is hard. And in most cases, people are doing their best. Life is hard and most people are doing their best. And I feel like we're in an age where people are so quick to come at each other or condemn each other in such overblown terms or cancel each other or whatever other kind of crummy cluster kind of behavior you all are engaged in. And I just think this whole ripoff of a life we're living would be a lot nicer if we'd give each other more of a break. I mean, more empathy, on a different day, I'd give a different answer, and I'm sure I'd give all kinds of answers in other versions of the simulation. But in this version, my answer to what it's all about is just, it's hard out there. So go out and give each other a break.
Yeah. Beautifully well put, Curtis. It resonates with this guy who gave a big lecture or big talk at Ann Arbor a couple of years ago. I think his name's David O'Brien. He invented made a video game called Mountain. It's just people stare at this mountain. And he says, fuck storytelling. It's all about empathy. And I thought, well, that's a good one. I like that word empathy a lot. But what you just said really resonates with someone you brought up earlier, who I can call a friend and a big influence was Captain Beefheart. He said, the stars are matter, we are matter, but it doesn't matter. So I love this. You teaching me about Thomas Nagel saying nothing matters helps me want to learn a lot more about him. So just in closing, 2 more questions. Curtis, what's the healthiest or most impactful cultural shift you see developing today?
Oh boy. Yeah. Well, even though in so many ways it's a cancer, and I wish we could figure out how to tweak it a bit to make it better, it's pretty damn extraordinary the way that social media can put a person into proximity with some of the best thinkers of our time. And you can hear thoughts from them in ways that were once only possible if you were one of their intimates. And I think that has just made for an extraordinary means for learning. And I think that's really positive if we can get rid of the social dilemma and all the other kind of yucky parts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And learn how to cope with the yucky parts and flip the yucky parts into flip the breakdowns into breakthroughs. So Curtis, again, this has been enlightening. I really appreciate it. I wish we can continue dialoguing forever, but as this Zoom comes in, what gives you the most optimism?
Gosh, I really have self-contradictory answers, because on the one thing, I'm prone to saying other people ruin everything, but the thing that gives me the most optimism is other people. And I'll reconcile that some other time.
It's really beautiful. Thank you again. I rarely get quotes within the interview itself that I can use, but I would love to be able to use this quote sometime in the future. This is like going to the gym. I like that. But I got to admit, my favorite is all the ones when I ask you the question. These are the words you said. Jesus, gosh, God, brother, bloody hell, fucking hell. That is, if I could put all those into one quote. Jerry's interview was blah, 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 like going to the gym. Boy, I loved it. It was really fun, and
it's fun for me too. I mean, this whole interview just feels so undomesticated, so kind of wild, and I feel like it. I mean, it was the reason I agreed to do it, because I saw the way you were questioning all these people, and it felt refreshing in a way that made me want to do it. And now I'm really pleased that I have, because I really enjoyed this.
Thank you, Dave. I mean, thank you, Curtis. I really appreciate it a lot. It really meant a lot to me, especially going over, man. That was long. So, I'm closing out now, and I'm going to say once again, thank you to Clinton, and thank you, Curtis, CW winner. What a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.